Hi, this is Martin. I've travelled down to Milton Keynes to meet with Bryan, one of the lead architects of O4W, who's going to show us how much easier it is to set up O4W in OpenInsight 10.
Hi Martin, thanks for having me. I wanted to demonstrate how OpenInsight 10, which now includes its own small web server built into the engine server, makes configuring O4W a much simpler process. The first thing you have to make sure of is that you've got a 64-bit version of Java installed on the computer. I know in this case we don't, so let's go ahead and download it. The easiest way to do that is to just go to Google and ask it for the Java SE 64-bit, and you'll find the runtime environment from Oracle, most likely, is the top results.
So Bryan, what happens if I download the 32-bit version?
You're more than welcome to, but it won't work.
Okay. And what if I've already got 32-bit installed on my machine?
64-bit can run side by side with 32-bit with no problem.
Cool.
If you do try and run it without the 64-bit, you'll get an error message telling you that it's not the right version. So the thing you have to do is you have to find the right version you want. In our case, it's going to be Windows x64. You have to tick the box that says you've accepted their license provision, and then you can hit the download button. This will take a few seconds. Alright, so now it's been downloaded. The next thing to do is just to check to make sure that we have installed it. We might have to put a mention of it into our path so that Windows knows how to find it. We can test this by bringing up the DOS command prompt and moving into your OpenInsight folder. If we type in Java -version, we can see that A, it was able to find the Java executable, and B, that it did install the 64-bit server, as expected. We'll leave that up for now, and launch your copy of OpenInsight. In a normal production environment, or even a normal development environment, you might run your engine server as a service, and there's a way that we'll set that up. Again, it's a one-click solution. But for initial testing, and also in development, if you're going to be developing O4W, it's very handy to have the engine server running at a DOS command prompt. It gives you the ability to debug the output in ways that you can't get when it's run as a service. So we'll be going back to that DOS command prompt in a little bit. Now, Martin, you have an application in particular that you want to have O4W running in, don't you?
Yeah, I'm working on an eval here,
right,
with the clinic application that I'm using for the desktop tutorial series. So once I've done this, I'm going to be working on the O4W lessons. So let's set it up for this one.
And clinic is the name of the application. That's the one we're in.
Yeah.
Right. If we go to the settings in the IDE and IDE settings, there's an option for the engine server. We can see the port numbers and everything that it's working on. It does know to talk to it as localhost, which is fine. But we want to configure the engine server so that it knows to talk to the clinic application instead of, or in addition to, one of the other applications that it's configured for. So, on this tab, we don't have to change anything. This is some overall information about the engine server. But on the web server tab, we need to tell it that we'd like to have the connection for clinic have its own virtual directory. It's also going to have a go to start.htm by default. And the virtual path is where in the directory structure should the clinic virtual directory point to. So when I type in localhost/clinic, I need to tell it where to pull its files from. And it's going to pull it from the O4W folder. In general, that's where it would normally get its information from. Once we filled in those lines with clinic, start.htm, and O4W, we double-click to bring up the details for that virtual directory. Here we have to specify the name of the application that it's going to connect to. As we said, that's clinic in uppercase. The username, we've only defined Martin, but many times you would want to define a virtual user that's only used for the O4W connection. And we type in the password. You can leave the startup flags, shutdown flags, listener routine, engine name, other folder, upload mode, all of those blank. The defaults will be fine for most situations.
Are they documented somewhere, Brian? Or?
They are. They're in the documentation as well. During debugging, we sometimes set the startup and shutdown flags to 1. That's when you're running the engine server from the DOS command prompt. You have the startup and shutdown flag set to 1. That tells the engine server to create a visible engine. So if your basic plus code has a debug in it or goes to the debugger for any reasons, you'd actually bring up the OpenInsight 10 graphical debugger. So that's very handy for debugging purposes. But in production, you can leave those blank.
Okay.
Hit the save button. We can click on OK. And the engine server has been updated. If you're curious what's on the other tabs, none of which we needed to change now, the engine server has built in the ability to generate statistics that it can then send to a statistics listener for analysis. OI10 also includes what we call the command chat functionality. This allows somebody using the console to send messages and, to some extent, control OI10 desktop users from a single location. So, for example, if you needed to log out a user or help them break a long select list, you can actually do them from the console, do those actions from the console, without actually having to go to that particular machine.
Is that a new thing in OI10 or?
The command chat is a new thing in OI10.
Okay, cool.
The engine server has the ability to run background tasks for you as well. There's a set of tasks that we always implement that cleans things up and runs the indexes for the sysprog application. But you can put in other processes that you wish to run. And these can either run at a normal timed basis, every hour, every 15 minutes, every minute, or run just when the engine server starts up, or run just when an engine starts up to log into an application. So you have all of these different trigger points that you can specify that you want something to happen. And finally, the engine server will actually record debug output if you wish, so that it makes it easier for you to figure out what's going on.
Does that slow the system down if you have the
debug output?
Yeah.
I don't really think so.
Okay.
Again, you might change the level of debugging output, how much you want to see. You can specify you just want to see errors, or you want to see things to a great level of detail, every communication that goes in and out. Obviously, the more that you record, the more impact it's likely to have.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, at this point, we're done with this, and in theory, we should be able to start the engine server. But before we do that, let's take a look at our users. As you'll see on the users screen, which we got to from settings users, there is a field that specifies the type of user, whether or not that user is an OpenInsight only user, or an O4W user, or both. For us to make this work, you're going to need to have both a user that's both OpenInsight and O4W, or at least O4W. So,
set that one up for both.
okay. So we change that to be OpenInsight only user. We change it to be a both OpenInsight and O4W user. And we now have an O4W user level option that's available. We'll change that from none to administrator.
Okay.
We can now right click and save. And that change is now in the system.
Brilliant.
Let's go ahead and minimize that. Come here and we'll start the engine server. The command line option to do that is Java space minus jar space OE socket server.jar. That's all that's required. But if you want to see some of that debug output that I was talking about, you can specify space minus D space and then the debug level. And for initial testing purpose, I usually use debug level 3.
So I normally start the engine server from the services.
Right.
That would run it in non-debug mode?
That would run it in non-debug mode by default, and you certainly wouldn't see any output.
Okay.
And once you're running as a service, you can't run it from the command line at the same time because there'll be conflicting attempts to access the same port.
Okay.
So if you want to go back and forth, that's certainly fine. You just have to remember to turn the service off, and then you can run it here at the DOS command prompt.
Okay.
Okay. We'll probably get these annoying little messages. Another reason why it's good to run it in debug mode is to see that. However, if it's not in debug mode, it should not present the messages, so you should still be all right. So if we come back to our O4W, our OI, which is there. At this point, that's all configured. So if we started a browser, let's make this a little bit smaller so you can see it side by side. To access that, you would now go to localhost :18888, which I believe is the default port for the web server that's built into the engine server.
Okay.
And if we typed in the path to console, the name of your application is Clinic. It knows to take us to the start page because we told it that was the default location for the Clinic virtual directory. We should be able to log in.
So what about all of the mappings and everything I used to have to do in OI9?
Don't need to do that because it's all in the specification that's in the eServer config file now.
So you've taken a whole load of work away.
Yes.
Magic.
We've added it all into a smarter version of an engine of a web server that's built into the engine server.
Brilliant. Just another example of how OI10 is making our life easier and quicker.
So we've now successfully logged in as the Martin user, the one that we decided should have both O4W and desktop OI privileges. And at this point, we can do anything we wanted. We could, for example, go into the O4W standard form wizard and create a new O4W form. Or we could go into the O4W WYSIWYG and create a drag and drop form.
Which we're going to have a look at in
the next lesson.
Benefits and features of O4W for 10. Cool.
Right. So let's just finish up configuration and getting started. Let's go ahead, close this, now that we know that it works. I'm going to stop the engine server running in debug mode with a Control-C. And at this point, I'll show you how to install it as a service. Let's look at our services first. Here's our services, and you'll see that under the O engine, there's nothing there.
Okay, yeah.
So let's minimize that. There's a folder in the RevSoft directory called OE Server. It stands for O-Engine server. We can navigate to it. Ah, already there. Magic.
Convenient.
And we hit the install service.bat. Double click there. It'll ask a few things. Say yes to allow it. Pop up a window, and now it's done. If we come back to our services, properly hit the F5 button for refresh, there's the O-Engine Server v10. Now, it's been installed, it's configured for automatic, but it hasn't actually started. We can start the service, and we can see it's running now. If we wanted to, we could go back to, we can close the DOS command prompt, we can go back to the browser, and verify that that's working by typing our URL in again. And it's working. So at this point, O4W has been configured for your system. It knows how to log into the Clinic application. It already has the proper Java running, all set up fine for your system. We can even at this point, now that it's running, run the console, which allows you to do everything you need to manage the system from a browser solution.
That's very cool.
So, using that, once you've been configured, once it's set up, once the service is running, you now have full functionality of the console, as well as the ability to do O4W development.
Brilliant. Okay, cool. So that's everything now configured, set up. I can do my development on web or on the desktop if I want to log in from elsewhere. So we'll have a look at some of the new features in the next video, which we're going to record in 5 minutes' time.
Correct.
Thanks, Brian.
My
Catch you
pleasure.
on the next video.
Thank you.